Black waitress finds her mother's photo in owner's wallet. The ending is heartbreaking. The evening rush at Denny's place had finally subsided, leaving behind the familiar aftermath of scattered plates, crumpled napkins, and the lingering aroma of comfort food. For Alana Jefferson, this was the 16th hour on her feet today. Her calves ached in silent protest, and the small of her back had long since given up negotiating for relief. But rent was due in 3 days, and student loans didn't pay themselves. Just another hour, she whispered to herself, wiping down the counter with mechanical precision. The restaurant had emptied except for a couple lingering over coffee in the corner booth. Tourists, judging by their matching San Francisco sweatshirts and the way they kept marveling at the authentic southern atmosphere of the place. As if Mason, Georgia was some exotic locale and not just the town most people drove through on their way to somewhere else. At 25, Alana had mastered the art of invisibility while cleaning up. Guests somehow never noticed the black woman clearing their tables, which meant they spoke freely around her, about their strong matches, about their marriages, about those people moving into their neighborhoods. Tonight she was grateful for this strange superpower. Her mind was elsewhere, caught between calculations of how to stretch her tips and memories of her mother's birthday, which had passed last week without anyone but Alana remembering. Behind the counter, Daniel Whitaker, owner, head chef, and occasional bartender of Denny's place, was counting the night's earnings, sorting bills with the methodical focus he applied to everything. At 52, Daniel had the weathered look of someone who'd spent too many years under fluorescent lights, his once dark hair now peppered with white, especially at the temples. His eyes, though, still carried a youthful alertness that could spot a plate ready for pickup from across the dining room. "Good night, Mr. Whitaker," called the tourists as they finally gathered their things. Daniel's professional smile appeared instantly. "Y'all come back now. We're here every day but Sunday." Alana didn't miss the irony. Sunday was for church, for prayers and hymns and community. Sunday was the one day Daniel closed the restaurant, though she'd never once seen him in any of the 3 churches in town. As the doors swung shut behind the last customers, Alana sighed with relief. "That's everyone, Mr. Whitaker." She still called him that, even after 3 years of employment. Something about Daniel had always felt unapproachable, despite his unfailing politeness. He nodded, sliding bills into the bank deposit bag. "Good work tonight, Alana. Those folks at table 7 left you a nice tip." "I saw that. 20% exactly. They calculated it on their phone." She managed a tired smile. "Very precise people." Daniel chuckled, a rare sound that never seemed to reach his eyes. "Most folks are precise about their money." He patted his back pocket, then frowned. "Have you seen my wallet? Could have sworn I left it right here." Alana scanned the counter. "Maybe it fell? Let me check." She leaned over, spotting the dark leather billfold that had slipped between the counter and the register. As she reached for it, her elbow knocked against a stack of menus, sending them cascading to the floor with a sound like startled birds taking flight. "I'm so sorry," she said, dropping to her knees to gather them. "I'll get these." "Don't worry about it," Daniel said, but Alana was already collecting the scattered items. That's when she saw it. Among the fallen menus, credit card receipts, and Daniel's wallet lay a photograph, worn at the edges, slightly faded, but unmistakable. A young woman with deep brown skin and a smile that could light up a room stood before a colorful mural. She wore a yellow sundress, her natural hair forming a perfect halo around her face, caught in mid-laugh by whoever held the camera. Alana's hands began to tremble. The menus slipped from her grasp, forgotten. That woman was her mother. Denise Jefferson had died 17 years ago, when Alana was only 8. Cancer, swift and merciless, had taken her in a matter of months. But here she was, frozen in time, looking happier than Alana could ever remember seeing her. And the photograph had fallen from her boss's wallet. "Alana? You all right?" Daniel's voice seemed to come from far away. When she didn't respond, he came around the counter, then stopped abruptly when he saw what she was staring at. "Where did you get this?" Alana's voice emerged as barely a whisper. She picked up the photograph with reverent care, as if it might dissolve at her touch. "This is my mother." Daniel's face, normally composed to the point of stoicism, transformed. Color drained from his cheeks. His eyes widened, lips parting in shock. For a long moment he said nothing, the only sound in the restaurant the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant drone of cars passing on the highway. "Your mother?" he finally managed, his voice strangely hoarse. Alana rose slowly, the photograph clutched in her fingers. "Denise Jefferson. My mother." Her shock was giving way to something else, confusion, suspicion, anger. "Why do you have a picture of my deceased mother in your wallet?" Daniel reached for the counter as if to steady himself. "Denise," he repeated, the name falling from his lips like a prayer long forgotten. "Denise Jefferson. Answer me," Alana demanded, her voice rising. The exhaustion of her double shift evaporated, replaced by a surge of protective fury. "How do you know my mother? Why are you carrying her picture? Have you known who I was this whole time?" The questions tumbled out one after another, each one sharper than the last. 3 years of polite, good mornings, and thank yous, suddenly felt like a lie, a cruel joke at her expense. Daniel's expression shifted from shock to something more complex, grief, perhaps, or guilt. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Alana had seen countless times when he was stressed about a large order or a difficult customer. "Alana, he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words that wouldn't come. "Did you know her?" Alana pressed, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples. "Were you friends? Something more?" The implication hung in the air between them. Daniel was white, older than her mother would have been. The possibilities racing through her mind made her stomach turn. "It's not what you think," Daniel said finally, his voice steadier now. "I didn't know. I had no idea you were her daughter." "Then explain this." Alana held up the photograph, her hands still trembling. "Explain why you've been carrying a picture of my mother all this time." Daniel looked at the photo, then at Alana, really seeing her perhaps for the first time. Recognition dawned in his eyes, the same warm brown as her mother's, the same determined set of the jaw. How had he never noticed before? "You deserve to know," he said at last. "But it's a long story, and not an easy one to tell. I've got nowhere to be," Alana replied, her voice brittle. Daniel glanced around the empty restaurant, at the half-clean tables and the floors still needing to be mopped. Then he made a decision. "Let's sit down," he said, gesturing toward a booth by the window. "Please." Alana hesitated, the photograph still clutched in her hand. Part of her wanted to walk out, to take the picture and never return to this place. But the larger part, the part that had spent 17 years collecting scraps of information about her mother, holding tight to fading memories, needed to know. She slid into the booth, placing the photograph carefully on the table between them. Daniel sat across from her, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles whitened. "How do you know my mother?" Alana asked again, her voice quieter now but no less insistent. Daniel took a deep breath, looking at Denise's smiling face in the photograph. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but with an undercurrent of emotion Alana had never heard from him before. "Your mother," he said, "saved my life." The overhead lights hummed in the empty restaurant as Daniel's gaze drifted to someplace far away. His fingers traced the edge of the table, as if mapping the contours of a memory. "It was 26 years ago," he began. "I wasn't always—" He gestured vaguely around the restaurant. "This. Back then, I was nobody. A college dropout with a mountain of debt and no prospects." Alana said nothing, watching his face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was pain, old pain, buried deep but never truly gone. "I was managing a convenience store on the edge of Atlanta. Not the nice part. The kind of place that sold more lottery tickets than milk." His laugh was hollow. "The owner paid me cash under the table. The security cameras were fake, empty boxes with blinking lights. The gun under the counter was real, though. The image was so at odds with the meticulous restaurateur she knew that Alana might have thought he was lying, except for the raw honesty in his voice. It was a Tuesday night in March, raining so hard you could barely see across the street. I was counting cigarette cartons for inventory when the bell over the door rang. Daniel's eyes grew distant. 2 men came in wearing ski masks. One had a gun. Alana's breath caught. She'd heard stories about robberies, of course, but had never known anyone who'd lived through one. They wanted the cash, the cigarettes, everything. I was emptying the register when your mother walked in. His voice softened at the mention of Denise. She was just stopping for milk. Wrong place, wrong time. Daniel swallowed hard. The guy with the gun panicked. Started shouting, waving it around. I thought we were all going to die right there, over $200 and some Marlboros. Alana leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the story. What happened? Your mother happened. A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's lips. She just stepped forward. Started talking to the guy like they were old friends having coffee. You don't want to do this, she kept saying. This isn't who you are. He shook his head in disbelief, still amazed after all these years. The guy was shaking, sweating through that stupid mask. And your mother, she kept her voice so calm. She looked him right in the eyes and told him he had a choice. That this moment didn't have to define him. Daniel's fingers curled into fists on the table. Then the gun went off. I don't think he meant to pull the trigger. It was just nerves. But there was this horrible bang, and I was sure she'd been hit. Alana felt a chill run through her. She'd always been told her mother died of cancer. Never had anyone mentioned a shooting. The bullet hit the wall. His partner grabbed him, and they ran. Just like that, gone. And your mother? Daniel's voice broke. She just asked if I was okay. Like she hadn't just stared down a loaded gun. Like she hadn't just saved my worthless life. He reached for the photograph on the table between them, his fingers hovering over it without touching. I called the police, but they didn't believe me. No cameras, no witnesses except the 2 of us. They thought I'd staged it for insurance money. But my mother backed up your story, Alana said. Daniel nodded. She did. Gave them her statement. But she refused to be named in any reports. Said she didn't want any attention. He looked up at Alana, his eyes searching her face. 3 days later, she came back to the store. I begged her to let me take one picture, just one, so I never forget what she'd done. Alana glanced down at the faded photograph. The mural. It was across the street from the store. She said it was better than standing in front of the place that almost got us wiped out. The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. She laughed when I took the picture. Said I was making too big a deal out of it. But you kept it. All this time. For 26 years. Daniel confirmed. She disappeared after that. I tried to find her, to thank her properly. But she was just gone. He looked at Alana with new understanding. Now I know why. The digital clock on Alana's nightstand glowed 3:42 a.m., its red numbers accusatory in the darkness. Sleep was impossible. Her mind replayed Daniel's story on an endless loop, searching for inconsistencies, for the lie she was certain must be hidden somewhere within it. But she found none. Her small apartment felt suffocating tonight. The walls, decorated with thrift store prints and a single photograph of her mother holding infant Alana, seemed to press inward. In the corner, a cardboard box labeled Mom and faded markers sat undisturbed beneath a folding table. Alana switched on the lamp and slid out of bed. Her bare feet moved silently across the worn carpet until she stood before the box. She couldn't remember the last time she'd opened it, years, probably. Each item inside was a tiny fragment of Denise Jefferson, carefully preserved but incomplete, like pieces from different puzzles. Her hands trembled as she removed the lid. The familiar scent of old paper and the faintest trace of her mother's perfume, cocoa butter and something floral, rose from within. Methodically, she began removing the contents: a diploma from community college, a costume jewelry necklace Alana had once loved playing with, a small Bible with highlighted passages. Deeper in the box, she found what she was looking for: her mother's journals. 3 spiral notebooks with faded covers, their pages filled with Denise's neat, careful handwriting. Alana had read them before, of course, hungry for any connection to the woman who had left too soon. But now she searched for something specific, any mention of that night, of Daniel, of a convenience store robbery. She flipped through the first journal, then the second, finding entries about work, church, and the exhaustion of single motherhood. Denise's honesty had always startled her, the admission of days when she wanted to give up, when the burden seemed too heavy. But there was always that resilient thread running through every entry. Alana smiled today. Worth everything. The third journal covered the months before and after Alana's birth. She moved to the dates Daniel had mentioned, her fingers sliding down the pages until she found March of that year. Nothing. No mention of any robbery. Frustrated, Alana returned to the box, digging deeper. At the bottom, sealed in a yellowed envelope, she found several newspaper clippings her mother had saved. Most were mundane: community events, church announcements, a recipe for sweet potato pie. Then, tucked between coupons, she found it, a small article titled, "Attempted Robbery at Downtown Convenience Store." The paper was thin with age, the words fading, but readable. Police responded to reports of an attempted armed robbery at Good Price Convenience on Tuesday night. The store clerk, Daniel Whitaker, 24, claimed 2 masked men demanded cash and merchandise before fleeing when a gun was discharged. No injuries were reported. No security footage exists, and police are investigating whether the incident was staged for insurance purposes. Alana's heart raced. It was real. All of it. But Denise's name appeared nowhere in the article, just as Daniel had said. Her mother, who had taught her to always stand up for what was right, had deliberately kept herself out of the story. Beneath the clipping, Alana found something else: a Greyhound bus ticket receipt dated 3 days after the incident. One way to Mason, Georgia. The town where Alana had grown up. The town where she still lived. The town where Daniel Whitaker had eventually opened Denny's place. Cold realization washed over her. Her mother hadn't just avoided publicity, she had fled Atlanta entirely. But why? Denise had always told her they moved to Mason for a teaching job at the elementary school. Never once had she mentioned Atlanta, or a convenience store, or a man named Daniel. Alana pulled out her phone, checking the time. Almost 4:30 a.m. now. Too early to call anyone. But there was one person who might have answers: her Aunt Loretta, her mother's older sister, and the only family Alana had left. She scrolled through her contacts, found Loretta's number, and typed a message she knew would get an immediate response, even at this hour. "I found out about what happened in Atlanta. The real reason Mom left. We need to talk." The response came less than a minute later. "Who told you? After all these years?" Alana's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How to explain? Finally she typed, "Daniel Whitaker. The store clerk from the robbery. He's my boss. Has been for 3 years." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then finally, "I'll be there at 8. Don't go to work today." Alana set down her phone and returned to the box, methodically replacing each item until only the newspaper clipping and bus receipt remained in her hand. She stared at them, these small pieces of evidence that had appended everything she thought she knew about her mother. All this time, she'd believed her mother was an open book, honest to a fault, transparent in all things. Now she wondered what else Denise Jefferson might have hidden from everyone. Even from her own daughter. Alana sat across from Daniel in a corner booth of Denny's place, now closed for the afternoon. She'd called him after her conversation with Aunt Loretta, a painful, tearful 2 hours that had left her reeling with revelations. The restaurant's closed sign hung in the window, the lights dimmed except for those above their table. "You tried to find her?" Alana asked, her voice hollow. The newspaper clipping lay between them like a bridge connecting their separate histories. Daniel nodded, his fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. "For years. I didn't have much to go on, just her first name and the memory of her face. Why? The question had been burning inside Alana since yesterday. Why spend so much time looking for someone you barely knew? Daniel's gaze drifted to the window, to the quiet street outside. When someone saves your life, it creates a debt that can never really be repaid. He paused, searching for words. But it was more than that. Your mother saw something in me that day, something worth saving. I wanted to prove her right. He gestured around the restaurant. I got clean. Got my GED. Went to culinary school on a scholarship. All because she made me believe I could be more than some dropout working a dead-end job. Alana absorbed this, trying to align this version of her mother, savior of broken men, with the woman she'd known, a quiet kindergarten teacher who made the best sweet potato pie in 3 counties and sang slightly off-key in the church choir. Tell me about the search, she said finally. Daniel sighed, his shoulders slumping with the weight of old disappointment. I started with the police report, but she'd only given them her first name. I checked shelters, community centers, put ads in papers. Even hired a private investigator when I could finally afford one. But you never found her. I came to Mason 15 years ago, Daniel said, surprising her. The PI had a lead, a kindergarten teacher named Denise who matched her description. Alana's breath caught. That was her. That was when I was 10. Daniel nodded. I know that now. I drove past the school once, saw a woman who might have been her on the playground with a group of children. But I lost my nerve. Why? His eyes met hers, filled with regret. What right did I have to disrupt her life? She'd moved on, built something new. And I was just a reminder of a night she clearly wanted to forget. The revelation struck Alana with physical force. All those years ago, while she was learning multiplication tables and playing hopscotch, Daniel had been there, watching from a distance, unknowingly looking at both the woman who saved him and the daughter he would later employ. So instead, you moved here and opened the restaurant. Named it after her, Daniel admitted. Denny's Place. It was as close as I could get to honoring her without using her full name. No one ever asked me about it. Alana thought of the countless times she'd worn the uniform with Denny's Place embroidered above the pocket. She'd been carrying her mother's name without ever knowing it. When you applied for a job here, Daniel continued, I never made the connection. Jefferson is a common name, and you don't look exactly like her. I have my father's features, Alana said absently, still processing the staggering coincidence. But my mother's eyes. Daniel nodded. I see that now. But back then, it had been so many years. And I never knew she had a daughter. The implication hung in the air between them, that Denise had been pregnant when she saved Daniel, when she'd faced down a gunman without regard for her own safety. Alana felt a chill run through her. She was always so careful with me, Alana said, more to herself than to Daniel. Never let me take risks. I thought she was overprotective. But maybe she knew exactly how precious life is. Daniel finished softly. They sat in silence, the weight of what might have been pressing down on them. If Denise had introduced herself properly that night. If Daniel had found the courage to approach her at the school. If any tiny piece of their shared history had shifted slightly, how different might all their lives have been? Did you ever wonder? Alana asked, breaking the silence. What would have happened if you'd found her sooner? Daniel's eyes clouded with emotions too complex to name. Every day for 26 years. Alana looked around the restaurant, at the comfortable booths, the warm lighting, the walls painted in her mother's favorite shade of yellow. A space created in tribute to a woman who had vanished from Daniel's life, only for her daughter to unknowingly walk into it years later. It's strange, she said quietly. You've been carrying her memory all this time, and I've been carrying her absence. Daniel reached across the table, hesitating before gently covering her hand with his. She must have been an extraordinary mother. Alana nodded, tears threatening. She was. After a moment, she asked, Did you ever think about leaving Mason? When you didn't find her? I almost did. Several times. His gaze swept across the restaurant again. But something kept me here. Maybe the same thing that brought her here in the first place. A fresh start, Alana murmured, echoing her aunt's words from earlier that morning. Or maybe, Daniel said, his voice barely audible. Some part of me knew I was where I needed to be. The early evening sun cast long shadows across Aunt Loretta's porch as Alana sat beside Daniel in matching rocking chairs. Inside, Loretta was making sweet tea. Proper sweet tea, she'd insisted. For a conversation like this. Loretta Jefferson was 15 years older than Denise had been, her hair now entirely gray, her movements slower but still purposeful. When she'd opened the door to find Daniel standing beside Alana, her hand had flown to her mouth, eyes widening with recognition. "You're him," she'd said simply. "The boy from the store." Now she emerged from the house carrying a tray with 3 glasses, condensation already beating on their sides. Her expression was solemn as she handed them out and settled into her own chair. "I should have told you years ago," she said to Alana. "But I promised your mother." "Promise her what?" Alana asked, the ice in her glass clinking as her hand trembled slightly. Loretta's eyes moved from Alana to Daniel and back again. "To never speak of Atlanta. To let that chapter of her life stay closed." She sighed, her shoulders dropping with the weight of a secret kept too long. "But she never imagined anything like this." "Like what?" Daniel asked. "Like her daughter working for the man whose life she saved." Loretta shook her head slowly. "The Lord has strange ways of bringing circles closed." Alana leaned forward. "Aunt Loretta, why did she leave Atlanta? Why did she never tell me about what happened?" Loretta took a slow sip of tea, as if gathering strength from its sweetness. "Your mother was 8 weeks pregnant when she walked into that convenience store." Her eyes fixed on Daniel. "With Alana." The revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of understanding spreading across Daniel's face. Alana felt her breath catch. She'd suspected from her earlier conversation with her aunt, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a new way. "She was unmarried," Loretta continued. "The father, your father, Alana, had already made it clear he wanted no part of raising a child. Denise was determined to do it on her own, but she was scared. Vulnerable. And then the robbery happened," Alana said softly. Loretta nodded. "When that gun went off." Her voice faltered. "She told me later she'd never been so terrified. Not for herself, but for you." She looked at Alana. "For the baby she was carrying. But she stepped forward anyway," Daniel said, his voice filled with wonder. "She risked everything." "That was Denise," Loretta said with a sad smile. "Always putting others first. Even strangers." "But why run?" Alana pressed. "Why leave town?" Loretta set her glass down, folding her hands in her lap. "The media started calling once the police report was filed. Someone at the station leaked that there had been a witness, a young black woman who talked down an armed robber. They wanted interviews, her picture in the paper. She was afraid of the attention," Daniel said, realization dawning. "She was afraid of being known," Loretta corrected. "Of being that black single mother who faced down a gunman while pregnant. She didn't want you growing up in the shadow of that story, Alana. And..." She hesitated. "And what?" Alana prompted. "And she was afraid of him finding out." Loretta nodded toward Daniel. "She was afraid he'd feel responsible somehow. Obligated." Daniel's face crumpled. "I would have helped her. Any way I could." "That's exactly what she didn't want," Loretta said gently. "Your guilt. Your gratitude. She wanted both of you to be free, you from any sense of debt, and Alana from being the child of that woman from the robbery." Alana tried to imagine her mother, young, pregnant, and afraid, making these decisions alone. Choosing to vanish rather than accept help or recognition. "She never regretted saving you," Loretta told Daniel. "But she regretted not being able to say goodbye." To explain, Daniel wiped at his eyes, making no attempt to hide his tears. "All these years," I never knew. I never had the chance to thank her properly, to tell her what she did for me. Would it have changed anything? Loretta asked, not unkindly. If you'd known she was pregnant, would you have walked away? Let her live her life. Daniel's silence was answer enough. She made her choice, Loretta said firmly. She chose Alana. She chose a quiet life in a small town where nobody knew their story. And she was happy in her way. Alana thought of her childhood, simple but secure, filled with her mother's love and constant presence. No matter how tight money had been, Denise had always been there, at every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every skin knee and nightmare. When she got sick, Loretta continued, her voice softer now. She made me promise never to tell you, Alana. She wanted your memories of her to be about life, not what she did that night. She never told anyone? Daniel asked. All those years in Mason? Not a soul. Loretta looked at him with something like compassion. But she kept that newspaper clipping. And sometimes I'd catch her looking at it. Daniel closed his eyes, absorbing this final piece of the puzzle. She remembered too. A silence fell over the porch, broken only by the gentle creak of the rocking chairs and the distant call of birds settling for the night. The three of them sat with the weight of a truth that had taken 26 years to surface, a truth that had come too late for the woman at its center. 2 weeks later, Alana stood in the freshly painted entryway of Denny's place, or rather, what had been Denny's place until yesterday. The old sign had come down at dawn, and a new one would go up by noon. The lunch crowd would arrive to find themselves at Denise and daughter. Daniel had presented the new name to her 3 days after their conversation with Aunt Loretta. He'd been nervous, uncertain, asking if it would be all right to honor her mother openly after all these years. It's her legacy, he'd said. And yours. If you're comfortable with it. Alana had been speechless, moved by the simple gesture that finally acknowledged what had remained hidden for so long. It felt right somehow, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Now, as morning light streamed through the windows, she traced her fingers over the framed photograph that hung beside the hostess stand. Not the faded one from Daniel's wallet, though that remained his most treasured possession, but a larger one Loretta had provided. Denise standing outside the elementary school on her first day as a teacher, her smile radiating pride and determination. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, Denise Jefferson, 1974 to 2008. Her courage changed lives. The restaurant was empty except for Daniel, who was checking inventory in the kitchen, and Loretta, who sat in a booth reviewing the new menus. The older woman had become a fixture these past weeks, sharing stories about Denise that neither Alana nor Daniel had ever heard, filling in the blank spaces of a life only partially known to each of them. We're ready for the sign installation, called a voice from outside. The sign maker, right on schedule. Alana stepped out to the sidewalk, watching as 2 workers carefully lifted the new sign into place. The font was elegant but unpretentious, the colors warm and inviting, just like her mother. Daniel joined her, wiping his hands on a towel. They stood side by side, watching in silence as the workers secured the final bolts. What do you think she would say? Daniel asked quietly. About all this? Alana considered the question, feeling the strange mixture of grief and gratitude that had become familiar these past weeks. She'd probably say we're making too big a deal out of it. She smiled faintly. But I think she'd be proud. Of both of us. Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on the sign. I've been carrying a debt for 26 years. Trying to live a life worthy of her sacrifice. Is that why you offered me the job? Alana asked, a question that had nagged at her since the revelation. Some cosmic coincidence? I offered you the job because you were the most qualified applicant, Daniel said firmly. But now, I can't help wondering if something bigger was at work. Like what? Like maybe the universe wanted to make sure her story wasn't forgotten. He turned to her. That first night, when you found the photograph, I've been carrying it for decades without anyone seeing it. What are the odds it would fall out exactly when you were there to recognize her? Alana had wondered the same thing. The staggering chain of coincidences that had brought them to this moment seemed too perfect to be random. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now." Daniel hesitated. "Now I was hoping you might consider becoming a partner in the restaurant. It's called Denise and Daughter, after all." Alana stared at him, stunned. "Daniel, I can't." "You can't," he interrupted gently. "You've been practically running the place for years anyway. I've watched you. You've got your mother's instincts, seeing what people need before they know themselves." The offer was unexpected, overwhelming. But as Alana looked up at the new sign bearing her mother's name, something settled in her chest, a sense of rightness, of coming home. This place had been created in tribute to her mother long before Alana knew the truth. Now it could be a legacy they both carried forward. "I'll think about it," she said, but they both knew her answer would be yes. That night, after the successful reopening and the last customer had gone, Alana stood alone in the darkened restaurant. The glow from the street lamps outside cast soft shadows across the floor. She moved to the framed photograph by the door, her fingers tracing her mother's smile. "He remembers you, Mama," she whispered. "We both do." In the quiet of the empty restaurant, Alana felt a peculiar sense of peace. Her mother had saved a life and asked for nothing in return. Daniel had spent decades trying to repay a debt that could never truly be settled. And Alana had unknowingly walked the path that connected them both. None of them had gotten the closure they deserved. Denise had never known how her selfless act had transformed Daniel's life. Daniel had never been able to thank the woman who saved him. And Alana had grown up without knowing the full measure of her mother's courage. But somehow, in this place where their separate stories had finally converged, a circle had been completed. The photograph smiled down from the wall, and for the first time since finding it in Daniel's wallet, Alana felt her mother's presence not as an absence to be mourned, but as a light that had guided them all home. The last debt was paid, not with money or words or even gratitude, but with memory, with the promise that Denise Jefferson's quiet heroism would never be forgotten, either by the man whose life she saved nor by the daughter she had protected with her silence. And in the end, perhaps that was enough.